Here we've got a dude who had absolutely everything going for him in motorsport. Formula 2 champion, Formula E world champion, but with all of those titles, why exactly couldn't Nyck de Vries make it in F1? Today, we'll find out.
Yeah, I feel like I'm probably as ready as I can be.
The brakes, well, the rear end just went.
Yeah, they're brake-by-wire.
Before de Vries was even thinking about F1, he was already absolutely smashing it in karting. In 2008, he won the World Series for the KF3 category and also bagged the German Junior Championship while he was at it. 2009 saw him completely dominate the European KF3 Championship. By September 2010, he'd won the Karting World Championship. At that point, McLaren took notice and signed him to their young driver program. Transitioning into single-seaters, though, was never going to be a straightforward story of immediate dominance. Like many talented karters before him, de Vries needed time to adapt to bigger cars. But once he found his rhythm, it was absolutely game on. In 2012, he stepped up to the Eurocup Formula Renault 2.0, one of Europe's most competitive proving grounds for young drivers. That first year, he finished 5th in the standings, a solid foundation with a race win and regular top 5 results. The following season, he stayed in the Eurocup and finished 5th again, but this time he added victories to his name and displayed a consistency that made it clear he was preparing for a much bigger push.
It was a quite tricky session. We started on rain tires and the team called me in early to go out on the slicks.
That breakthrough came in 2014. Over the course of 14 races, he won 5, but climbed the podium 10 times, finally securing the title. Alongside this, he also took part in the Formula Renault Alp Series and collected a second title in the same year, finishing first with 9 wins. With momentum firmly on his side, de Vries stepped up in 2015 to the more powerful Formula Renault 3.5 series, which is basically a GP2. He easily secured 3rd place there, but you start to get the idea that he was a proper champion in the making, right? There's absolutely no way to deny that. The move to the GP3 series in 2016 with ART Grand Prix brought 2 wins and some podium finishes. While he ended the season 6th overall, de Vries was sharing the track with future Formula 1 stars like Charles Leclerc and Alexander Albon. That's a tough crowd. The next logical step was Formula 2, the last rung on the ladder before Formula 1. In his rookie F2 season in 2017, driving for Rapax and then Racing Engineering, de Vries finished 7th in the standings, scoring his first win at the Monaco feature race. The following year, he switched to Prima Racing, improving to 4th in the championship and collecting 3 wins. But he still needed a proper win and a Formula 2 title if he was actually serious about getting into F1. So for 2019, Nyck signed with ART Grand Prix, executing a near-flawless campaign with 4 race wins and 12 podium finishes. This performance allowed him to climb the top of the Formula 2 championship, finishing ahead of Nicolas Latifi and Luca Ghiotto.
How many laps and how much energy you can use throughout the race.
However, while most F2 champions would be sitting by their phones waiting for F1 teams to call, de Vries made a decision that was not that bright. He went to race in Formula E out of all things. The all-electric racing series was rapidly becoming one of motorsport's most competitive championships, which is cool, but it also meant potentially delaying his F1 dreams. Racing in Formula E with Mercedes, de Vries was up against former F1 drivers, established champions, basically everyone who was anyone in open-wheel racing. And you know what? De Vries absolutely thrived in this madness. In the 2020 season, he conquered the most competitive Formula E field in the series history to become Formula E world champion. By his mid-20s, Nyck de Vries had proven himself across multiple series in different types of cars against different styles of competition. He was rapid, technically brilliant, and most importantly, he was adaptable. But somehow, F1 teams kept ignoring him like he'd insulted their mothers.
De Vries behind on a hard lap. What do you, De Vries? No, De Vries, sorry.
2021 was particularly painful to watch. George Russell and Lando Norris were establishing themselves as F1 stars, collecting podiums, while de Vries was stuck in limbo. What made it even more mental was that AlphaTauri team principal Franz Tost would later admit he never understood why Nyck de Vries wasn't in F1 during this period. When team bosses are publicly questioning why you're not on the grid, something's clearly gone wrong behind the scenes. However, de Vries refused to give up. Instead of accepting defeat, he positioned himself as the ultimate professional, working as a test driver for Mercedes, staying sharp and ready. Throughout 2022, he became F1's most active substitute, jumping into cars for Aston Martin, Mercedes, and Williams in various practice sessions. There is a rumor that during a postseason test with AlphaTauri at the end of 2022, de Vries complained loads about the car's weaknesses. Rather than being put off by this, Franz Tost actually welcomed the feedback and turned it into a wake-up call for the team's engineers. But still, testing is one thing and earning a race seat is completely different. As 2023 approached, de Vries was reportedly considering splitting his time between Formula E and endurance racing if his F1 dreams didn't materialize. The sport's most qualified outsider was facing the reality that his window might be closing. But then, fate intervened in the most dramatic way possible.
How was it out there?
It was pretty cool.
In September 2022, Williams driver Alex Albon had been struck with appendicitis and needed emergency surgery. The team required an immediate replacement, and de Vries was called up. With basically no preparation time in a car he'd only driven in practice sessions, de Vries properly shined. He out-qualified Williams regular Nicholas Latifi, which is not much, but we'll take it. Sunday's race was a masterclass in composure under pressure. De Vries drove with calm precision, executing strategy perfectly. When the checkered flag fell, he crossed the line in 9th place, scoring 2 championship points on his Formula One debut. The reaction was immediate. Williams' team principal was openly keen to sign him up for a 2023 seat after witnessing firsthand what de Vries could do for the team. Alpine invited him for talks as they evaluated their driver options. Even Red Bull, notoriously difficult to impress, stated their interest. However, de Vries wasn't content to wait for office. Over dinner after the race, fellow Dutchman Max Verstappen gave him crucial advice. Call Helmut Marko, the influential Red Bull advisor who oversees their entire driver program. Sensing the opportunity of a lifetime, de Vries took the initiative and called Marko to pitch himself directly. That phone call, coupled with driver movements across the grid, set in motion the chain of events that would finally give Nyck de Vries his Formula One opportunity.
Great job from the things I saw also in terms of defending. He just kept his cool, didn't make mistakes. It's impressive, of course, in your first race.
Yeah, excellent job, and throughout all of our karting career, the 3 of us raced against him, knew him well, and he was always one of the very best.
Within weeks of his Monza heroics, the pieces fell into place. AlphaTauri needed a driver for 2023 after Pierre Gasly secured a move to Alpine. So, they announced Nyck de Vries as their new driver, alongside Yuki Tsunoda. This signing was remarkable for several reasons. Traditionally, Red Bull fills RB mini seats with graduates from their youth program, teenagers who've been developed within their system. Yet here they were hiring a 27-year-old rookie from outside their organization. I don't think that was desperation on their part. This was probably Marko truly thinking that de Vries represented something special. Franz Tost was even more optimistic, setting expectations that few rookies have ever faced. Tost went on record saying he expected Nyck to be very competitive from the first race onwards, with only a minimal learning curve. Think about that for a moment. A team principal publicly stating that he expected instant competitiveness from a rookie. The media portrayed him as a rookie plus as well, who was technically new to F1 racing, but with experience that could make him an immediate contributor rather than a project to be developed. I mean, these weren't unreasonable expectations given de Vries' background, and his confidence in interviews reinforced this narrative, as he carried himself with the poise of someone who belonged at this level.
Part of my role and probably value being a little bit more experienced to kind of, bring a bit of an outside view into the team and to work closely together to, basically get ourselves back into, the good points.
But we've seen it time and time again, even with Lewis Hamilton and his Ferrari move. The higher the expectations, the more unlikely they are to be fulfilled. However, there was still one person on the grid who didn't buy the hype around de Vries. Red Bull Racing Team boss Christian Horner had privately held doubts about the signing, as Helmut Marko would later reveal. And, by the way, I made an entire video about Christian Horner, looking into how he managed to build Red Bull into the juggernaut that it is today. You should check it out. And if you like the video so far, consider subscribing to the channel, as I'm trying to get to 30,000 subscribers by the end of summer. Subscribe. Horner's skepticism was notable, given his experience identifying talent, but Marko's influence ultimately won out. Additionally, de Vries' signing came after Red Bull's initial plans had fallen through. Their first choice, American Colton Herta, couldn't secure the necessary super license, leaving them scrambling for alternatives. Regardless of the behind-the-scenes dynamics, by the time the 2023 season approached, all eyes were on de Vries to validate the immense faith placed in him. A world champion with every tool for success was finally getting his shot at the pinnacle of motorsport. What could possibly go wrong?
I think on a medium stint we pushed a bit too hard in the beginning and then we paid the price in the middle.
When the lights went out for the 2023 season opener in Bahrain, the harsh reality of Formula One immediately slapped de Vries in the face. Qualifying 19th out of 20 cars was bad enough, but what made it worse was the gap to his teammate. You know, if you can't match your teammate, you can't hide behind excuses about the car being uncompetitive. The race itself was even more concerning. While de Vries managed to finish 14th without any major incidents, he was consistently slower than Tsunoda throughout the weekend. Not just by a few tenths, by a margin that suggested fundamental issues with pace. This wasn't the performance of a driver ready to take Formula One by storm. If Bahrain was concerning, Saudi Arabia was alarming. The high-speed Jeddah street circuit is one of Formula One's most demanding tracks, requiring absolute precision. De Vries, learning the circuit for the first time while dealing with car problems that cost him valuable practice time, looked completely out of his depth. Qualifying 18th was becoming a disturbing pattern, but it was his approach to wheel-to-wheel combat that revealed deeper issues. In his own words, he admitted he wasn't aggressive enough when fighting for position. While other drivers were making bold moves, de Vries was playing it safe in a sport that rewards calculated aggression. Australia provided a brief glimmer of hope when he reached Q2 for the first time, taking 15th on the grid. Finally, it seemed de Vries was finding his rhythm. However, Formula One has a cruel way of building you up just to knock you down harder. The Australian Grand Prix race was insanely chaotic, and de Vries made contact with Esteban Ocon during a safety car restart, picking up damage that dropped him to the back of the field. Then, at the final restart, Williams rookie Logan Sargent plowed into the back of de Vries' car, ending his race entirely. While the incidents weren't entirely his fault, the optics were terrible. 3 races in, 0 points, a growing narrative that de Vries was struggling to adapt to F1 racing. Meanwhile, Tsunoda was consistently extracting more from the same car, narrowly missing points on multiple occasions. The pressure was mounting, and you could clearly see it starting to affect de Vries' decision-making on track. If there was a single moment when de Vries' Formula One dream began its irreversible collapse, it was the Azerbaijan Grand Prix in Baku. Arriving in Azerbaijan, de Vries faced another circuit he'd never raced on before. Making matters worse, the sprint race format meant just one practice session. The margin for error was virtually non-existent. Incredibly, de Vries set the 6th fastest time, suddenly looking like the confident world champion who had impressed at Monza. Maybe, just maybe, he was finally finding his feet in Formula One. However, in qualifying, the pressure got to him. Pushing too hard in his desperation to prove himself, de Vries brushed the wall, breaking his suspension. The session was over, he was dead last on the grid. For a driver already under intense scrutiny, starting from the back at a track where overtaking is notoriously difficult was a disaster. However, the Sunday Grand Prix was where de Vries hit absolute rock bottom. On lap 10, with no pressure from other cars, no insane circumstances, he simply carried too much speed into a corner and slammed into the barriers, all by himself.
Here's Nyck de Vries.
Oh, I clipped the inside wall.
Yeah.
And then there you can see this.
Yep, a solo crash, ending his race early while running at the back of the field. This was the moment from which de Vries' standing within the team never recovered. This wasn't a racing incident or a mechanical failure. This was a fundamental error in judgment that suggested a driver who was simply overdriving. From Baku onward, you could see the desperation creeping into de Vries. Instead of settling into a rhythm, building confidence gradually, he was pressing harder, taking bigger risks, trying to force results that simply weren't there. In Miami, this desperation manifested in an over-optimistic dive on Lando Norris at the very start of the race. De Vries locked up his brakes, clattered into the McLaren. While both continued racing, Nyck immediately fell to the back and spent the rest of the race in damage limitation mode, finishing a distant 18th. However, Monaco provided a brief pause in his horrendous downfall. The Principality's narrow streets suited de Vries' cautious approach, so he managed his best result of the season with a 12th place finish in tricky wet conditions. For one weekend, it really looked like maybe he could turn things around. However, that optimism was short-lived. In Spain, despite another Q2 appearance in qualifying, the race pace gap to Tsunoda was so vast that while his teammate was fighting for points on the lead lap, de Vries was being lapped by the race leaders. The visual was devastating. Two cars with identical equipment, one fighting at the front of the midfield battle, the other so far behind it was considered a mobile chicane. Sounds very familiar to the Verstappen and Lawson situation, doesn't it? Canada brought what I would consider the final nail in de Vries' Formula 1 coffin. Stuck behind Kevin Magnussen's slower Haas, frustration boiled over into one final desperate dive. De Vries attempted an optimistic overtake that went horribly wrong, sending both cars spinning off track and dropping him to the last place. The Austria and Silverstone weekends that followed were basically exercises in damage limitation. Multiple time penalties for track limits violations, more on-track incidents, and consistent finishes far behind his teammate. By Silverstone, de Vries was qualifying like 18th, finishing races dead last. The statistics told a brutal story. 10 Grands Prix entered, 0 points scored. Most damningly, not once had he finished ahead of his teammate on race day. By early summer 2023, the paddock consensus was clear. Nyck de Vries was hanging on to his Formula 1 seat by the thinnest of threads. Helmut Marko, never one for diplomatic language, publicly issued what sounded like an ultimatum in May: improve in the next few races or face the consequences. The rumors were swirling that Marko had given de Vries a specific deadline, with Daniel Ricciardo being prepared as a replacement. After the British Grand Prix at Silverstone, where de Vries qualified 19th and finished last once again, Red Bull made their decision. The call came swift and brutal. Nyck de Vries was out, effective immediately. Franz Tost acknowledged the tough circumstances, a rookie in an uncompetitive car, facing many unfamiliar tracks, but stated that by mid-season, the team felt that progress should have come by now. Crucially, Tost cited the lack of improvement at races where Nyck's prior experience should have helped, like Austria and Silverstone, which was probably a tipping point. With even more new tracks coming up on the calendar, the team feared the learning pains would simply continue indefinitely. For Helmut Marko, the man who had championed de Vries' signing against Christian Horner's skepticism, the outcome was particularly painful. But at least he was honest and didn't mince words, accepting that his highest mistake was Nyck de Vries. Marko later observed that, in an attempt to go faster, Nyck just made mistakes. Those desperate lunges on Norris and Magnussen, the solo crash at Baku, the collision with his own teammate, these were the moves of a driver feeling the pressure and overestimating what was possible with his equipment.
By 44 seconds, the Centura comes to a halt. Kurt Luby bodily removed from the car.
I think that the psychological burden of being an older, accomplished rookie also worked against him. De Vries reportedly wasn't keen to label himself a typical rookie, given his background, which may have created additional self-imposed pressure. While a 19-year-old rookie has the luxury of making mistakes and learning from them, a 28-year-old world champion doesn't have that same forgiveness factor. Every error stung more because it contradicted the narrative of his credentials. This wasn't how a Formula 2 and Formula E champion was supposed to look in Formula 1, you know what I mean? After being dropped from Formula 1, Nyck de Vries faced the kind of career crossroads that often ends in quiet retirements or years drifting in motorsport obscurity. But instead of fading away, de Vries returned to Formula E, the series where he had once been world champion, and joined Mahindra Racing for the 2024 season. Mahindra had been struggling, and the team wasn't expected to contend for podiums. But with de Vries and Edoardo Mortara as teammates, the team began to find traction. By May 2025, de Vries had already put Mahindra back in the spotlight with a second-place finish at the Monaco E-Prix. At the same time, he stepped fully into the world of endurance racing, joining Toyota Gazoo Racing for the 2024 World Endurance Championship season. Teaming up with veterans Kamui Kobayashi and Mike Conway in the 7 car, de Vries quickly made his mark. He helped secure a win at the 6 Hours of Imola and followed it up with a second-place finish at the legendary 24 Hours of Le Mans. In the span of less than 2 years, Nyck de Vries has managed to rebuild his motorsport identity. He is no longer just the guy who got axed from AlphaTauri. He's a key figure in Mahindra's Formula E resurgence, a Le Mans podium finisher for Toyota, and a respected guest in Japan's premier single-seater championship. His journey hasn't been linear, and it certainly hasn't been easy, but it's a powerful example of how failure in one arena doesn't preclude success in another. De Vries is a good driver, just not Formula 1 good. Would you agree? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe.